For the purposes of today's video, I will have to name drop Doom: The Dark Ages. This is a game published, funded, and owned by Microsoft, who offer material supports to the state of Israel in their ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people, as well as the apartheid structure that they're currently upholding. Specifically, this comes in the form of the Microsoft Azure service provided to the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, who are carrying out this genocide and carrying out these unlawful and unjustified, essentially bullying campaigns against the people of the West Bank. Microsoft has been named as a boycott target by the BDS movement, Boycott, Divest, Sanction, an organization focused on Palestinian liberation. You can see the information on their website. I will link that down below. And they've also specified Xbox products, so Game Pass subscriptions, hardware purchases, but also purchases of games. I will not be discussing the game on my platforms at all, again, outside of this one instance where I name drop it. And if you are covering the game in any capacity, be it like professionally or you're just making content for it, I think you do have a moral responsibility to at least give a disclaimer for Microsoft's involvement in the genocide against Palestine. I don't think that's a very high bar to clear, and I think the most material difference we can make is put public pressure on companies like Microsoft, make this bad PR for them. I think that is far more important even than just the 60 or, in this case, $80 you might spend on the video game, the $15 you might spend on Game Pass. It's important to never stop talking about it. And again, just wanted to give that disclaimer. Now on to the video. There was a recent semi-viral clip of DSP Darkside Phil. Is that I was briefly wondering, okay, does the P stand for something else? I don't know. There's a bunch of things it could stand for. He was playing the new Doom in that little clip, and the post specifically calls out the fact that he's backing away from combat. He's sort of chipping away at enemies from a safe, comfortable distance, and implicitly saying, yeah, this is a dumb, bad way to play the game, you fucking idiot. Haha. Now, DSP, obviously not someone who warrants any kind of defense for him, right? But I do think the underlying topic and rhetoric is really interesting. The underlying sentiment here seems to be, you're playing the game wrong, hence the title of my video. I'm sure this is something you've seen discussions about, maybe even have strong opinions on. Now, number one, in this specific instance, obviously, I don't even know what DSP's opinion on the game is. If he uses this as an impulse to criticize the game, right? If he doesn't, if he's still enjoying playing the game this way, then there's no problem, right? Then there's not even a reason to talk about it. I wasn't even aware when I first saw that post that the person who made it, that's just a DSP hate account. They've dedicated their entire existence to hating on DSP. More power to you, man. But barring that, does that sentiment have merit? Can you play... It sounds ridiculous to even say, can you play a game wrong? Or is criticism based on unorthodox ways of playing a game valid? I think a really actionable example of this is Donkey's review of Dragon Quest XI, where he basically fights every monster the first time he sees it, and then skips past every, subsequent appearance of that monster. And this worked for most of the game. This was for him an enjoyable way to play. But then toward the end, the level curve dramatically, what do you call this? It just dramatically inclined, I guess, and it was no longer possible to play the game that way, and he had to kind of halt and grind a lot.
This is where Dragon Quest said to me, no, you are playing this game wrong. This is now World of Warcraft. Go and grind XP for 3 hours. In the back half of the game, the pacing is slowed down to the point of tedium. You are going to hear this song a lot.
And a common response that I saw to that as well, you're playing the game wrong. Like, if you just fought everything sort of organically as you're going, then you wouldn't have this issue. Now, that as an argument is obviously pretty suspect to begin with, because you're asking him to engage with the thing he didn't find enjoyable in the first place. But you know what? Let's entertain it. Let's entertain the concept. Games obviously are a subjective, fluid experience that makes the idea that you can somehow play them wrong not entirely ridiculous. There's obviously the really obvious universal factor that even applies to more static media, where if you're not giving them your full attention, then you're unlikely to come away from them with a really interesting, meaningful takeaway. If I zone out halfway through Oppenheimer or something, will people really care about my review that much, right? Probably not. And whether that was the case will be obvious in my rhetoric. If I have have nothing interesting to say about Oppenheimer. Well, guess what? It's probably because I was zoning out. See, but pay attention to what I just said there, right? You give a bad review of Oppenheimer, and I can attack your points, but then, okay, maybe it also tells me that you didn't pay attention to the film, right? If I'm instead focusing my rhetoric on the fact that you zoned out halfway through the movie, we're not gonna have a productive conversation, right? I'm not actually attacking your points, which that is what I should do, right? So by that same logic, with games, if you're zoning out, approaching them in bad faith, whatever, yes, it can become much more obvious because it materially manifests in the game itself, in your gameplay. But I'm still, by pointing that out, by focusing on that, I'm still sidestepping the actual conversation. Does your actual points have merit? And to be honest, if we're focusing on the donkey example, and saying, okay, he made the conscious choice to fight every enemy once the first time he sees them, and then ignore every subsequent appearance of that enemy. That's a pretty conscious, awake way of playing the game, right? He thought about how he wants to engage with it. He curated his experience. You could even say this about the DSP thing, right? Where, okay, he realized that it's strategically good to back away from combat and then just fucking deal with enemies from afar. Could you really call that engaging with a game in bad faith or in a lazy, unattentive way? I don't know. Now, obviously games are complex beasts. You might still get through a game very much unscathed, very smoothly, and still miss the point of it. Some of y'all know I had a big Crazy Taxi binge earlier this year, and it was really hilarious studying reviews for that game. There's a legendary IGN quote where they say the game has almost no depth, but that's fine. Like, that was a person that was paid to play that game who thought they got it. You know, they thought they got it, and clearly they didn't. And obviously there's no way for me to prove that. I think having their gameplay as a reference point, that would actually be useful, because then I could be like, well, you missed all of these nuances, blah, 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 and then we could have a conversation about it. But again, even in that case where you might say, okay, they engaged with it in a very shallow way, and they sort of tricked themselves into thinking that this is all the game is. Even though that is the case, I'm not actually gonna reach a meaningful conclusion by focusing on that aspect. I should instead materially and productively focus on the specific things they're saying. Now, the bigger philosophical question here is, what is the role of a game in this, right? What is the role in game design to prevent this from happening even, right? In the case of Crazy Taxi, I think the game is pretty explicit in whether you're doing well or not, and obviously it's a pretty exploitable game, but I would assume that somebody who claims that the game has almost no depth, they probably didn't even get to the point where it becomes exploitable. They probably got pretty crappy scores and then just left it very quickly. We could talk all day about sort of ways that Crazy Taxi could be more motivating, could grab the average person more by the balls and get them to explore its depths. Unfortunately, often that manifests in ways that I don't enjoy, with like progression systems and shit like that. That's a whole topic. But really, I would argue that is a case where, okay, I think the motivational loop and the call and response between game and player is pretty sound. It's a game that very directly evaluates you and where you pretty immediately see, okay, I'm actually not being very effective. And I think that is really the case with scoring focused games, that sort of thing. It's much harder for the player to just weasel their way through and shrug their shoulders. In survival focused games, I think that's really where this idea of, okay, I'm gonna engage with it in a kind of a lazy way that paints the game in a bad light, that's really where that can come out, where the potential for that coming out is high, because every way that survives is valid, right? Doesn't matter if you do it fast, if you do it in a sort of visually skillful manner. Whereas those things may be required in a scoring-focused game. In a survival-focused game, not so much the case. Unless we're talking really specific games like shmups, for example. I had a really funny instance of this the other day where I was I was basically going off about how Fire Emblem is kind of a bad series, and then a good friend of mine, I was telling him, yeah, you can just turtle and these games are bad. The games put up no resistance toward that strategy. It's just objectively good, right? And he was telling me, just don't turtle, dude. I don't know if he was serious, to be honest with you. Because that is a funny thing to say. Doing anything other than turtling like that is just strategically bad, right? And I think these types of games, they do propose ways for the player to put themselves in a more difficult situation. For example, by imposing a turn limit or something, you have to do this fast. So then this immediately cuts out sort of stalling type strategies. The question we now have to ask is this desirable? Is it actually that big of a deal that I can stall and back away in a game like Doom? And for that, I don't actually have the answer. There's no conclusion in that respect for this video. It really depends on your personal framework. Obviously, I've enjoyed a lot of games that don't have very harsh stipulations or restrictions in that nature. I was talking to my friend Pang about Super Metroid, for example, which obviously is a very rich game, but it has nothing really propelling you into that richness very much. It's just sort of there. I'm very open to that type of experience, but then I'm equally open to experiences where that propellant does exist. Again, like something like Crazy Taxi, where everything you do directly relates to time somehow, and that makes everything you do critically important. The overall point you should take away from this is that you're not really gonna reach anything resembling a useful conclusion in games discourse by attacking the other person's approach to the work in question. So just call them bad faith or lazy or whatever. Attack the actual argument. Yeah. So at the time of recording, I plan to go live in about 1 hour. I'm hoping that you'll be seeing this before I go live, so you can see my stream, you can join in. Because if my disclaimer at the start was in any way important to you, that's what we'll be talking about in that stream. We will not be playing Doom. I'll talk about my read of the overall situation, give some advice on how I would move, and lighten the mood with games that are not Doom that maybe scratch a similar itch. So I hope to see you there.